Cine, the Council on International Non-Theatrical Events, has awarded this film a Golden Eagle in token of its excellence and has selected it to represent the United States of America in international motion picture events abroad.
This is Adirondack country, a 13,000 square mile segment of the Canadian Shield, the geologic roots of North America, which are more than 1 billion years old. This uplift of ancient rock forms over 1,000 mountains, which are the source of 30,000 miles of rivers and streams, 2,000 lakes, and 500,000 acres of wetlands. From a high central plateau, these waters course downwards, cutting deep gorges and flumes until they reach sea level. Within this great mountain island is the 9,000 square mile Adirondack Park, a land of wilderness areas, a land of lakes and rivers, still steeped in the mystery and solitude of centuries ago. A covenant in the New York State Constitution protects 2.5 million acres of the New York State Forest Preserve in the park from commercial use. An area bordering the park and part of the geologic Adirondacks is 4,000 square miles of lovely rural country. Here, great waterfalls of the Adirondack rivers power hydroelectric stations and mills. Reservoirs store municipal water supplies, and hundreds of thousands of acres of state timberlands produce lumber for commercial use. This is the Adirondack, the land nobody knows. In upstate New York, the Adirondack region is the southernmost tip of the vast Canadian Shield, an isolated geologic dome with mile-high peaks at its center and near sea-level waterways at its borders. St. Lawrence River, Lake Champlain, Lake George, the Mohawk River, the Black River, and Lake Ontario. Geothermal activity is pushing the Adirondack Dome upwards at a rate 3 times faster than the rising Alps, bringing ancient rock to the Earth's surface, rock that was once 40 miles underground. Shifts in the Earth's crust form northeast-southwest faults into 5 distinctive mountain ranges, with steep valleys and deep lakes. Erosion took most of the sedimentary rock cover, exposing the hard crystalline granitic bedrock. Ice Age glaciers rounded Adirondack peaks, and a young river system began near its center. The Adirondack, a Huron word meaning they of the rock clan. The Adirondacks, living mountains of ancient rock.
Verplanck Calvin climbed Graves Mountain for the first time in October 1873. Calvin was the most famous surveyor of the Adirondacks at the time, and he had that rare ability to not only observe, but to also record it in notes for the legislature. When he stood on the top of Seward Mountain and wrote in his notes that never had he seen such a profound wilderness of lakes, ponds, and mountains that extended on to the horizon. And he also observed that because of the effect of the sphagnum moss and the humus, that it was a main watershed of New York State. He proposed that this area be set aside for the people of the state as a either a forest preserve or as an Adirondack State Park. The loggers clear-cut the areas and left tremendous amounts of slash on the ground. And because of the fact that it opened up the forest canopy and allowed the sun to get in and dry the forest floor out, and as a result, when these fires started to burn, there was really no method of controlling them, at least man-made methods.
In most mountains of the world, whatever precipitation passes the mountain, either in the form of cloud droplets or rain or snow, there are clouds involved. The clouds precipitate in different ways, and perhaps the most important is that the cloud droplets, which are very, very tiny, impact on leaves or needles or rocks. This then gradually produces drops, which then fall and slowly percolate into the streams and finally into the brooks and creeks and rivers. In the Adirondacks, we're extremely fortunate in that the upper part of practically all of our mountains have this wonderful sphagnum moss. It acts just like a sponge. And it soaks up this water that is intercepted by the leaves and the needles and the rocks and other things, and slowly releases this into the streams that run off and finally enter the rivers and lakes. Early in the 1900s, lumbering was one of the dominant operations. The lumberjacks managed to do a lot of damage. And what damage they didn't do by disturbing the soil was completed by the fires that ravaged the mountains. The devastating fires that swept over the mountains weakened these steep slope soils so that many of them slid into the valleys. And it'll be another 1,000 years before we have a decent deposit of soil on which trees and other things will grow.
In 1894, an amendment to the New York State Constitution placed the forest preserve under its ironclad protection. The residents of the state had a wilderness land, a land that was their land.
The reason why we still have wilderness so close to so many millions of people is this rather marvelous constitutional protection called Article 14. To my knowledge, there is nothing like it in the world.
The lands of the state, now owned or hereafter acquired, constituting the forest preserve as now fixed by law, shall be forever kept as wild forest lands. They shall not be leased, sold, or exchanged, or be taken by any corporation, public or private, nor shall the timber thereon be sold, removed, or destroyed. Colvin's foresight led to the creation of the New York State Forest Preserve in 1885. This land contained nearly 700,000 acres that had reverted back to the state for unpaid taxes. Since then, the Forest Preserve has grown to nearly 2.5 million acres within the blue line boundary of the Adirondack Park. The entire park includes about 6 million acres of lands in public and private ownership. It's the largest park in the United States, larger than the state of Massachusetts, larger than the combined areas of Yellowstone, Yosemite, Grand Canyon, Glacier, and Olympic National Parks. It's a park where people can stay for a day or a lifetime. Today, the character of the Adirondack Park is shaped by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation that has the care, custody, and control of the forest preserve. The Adirondack Park Agency that assists in long-range planning for state land and has zoning authority for private lands in the park. The Department of Transportation that carries out travel corridor recommendations developed by the Adirondack Highway Council. And the Adirondack Conservancy that cooperates with both the public and private sectors in acquiring land and scenic easements for major ecologically important regions within the park.
Many years ago, we had some very unusual people who saw the need for a wild place and found a way to protect the lands. You have a mixture of private and public holdings. The private holdings are in the lowlands or the regions in between the mountains mostly. And the areas that we want to keep wild are in the more inaccessible places, the mountaintops, the deep valleys, and areas of that sort. Very fortunately, some statesman-like people saw to it that a new agency was created, the Adirondack Park Agency. They are really charting new ground. Again, New York is going to show the way. Show how you can have a compatibility between people and wilderness. One of the problems in any ecological system is the slowness with which things become established. It starts out with lichens, then followed by mosses, and then things like ground pine and other plant-like vines, followed by brush and alder and popple. And then finally, after these die and decay and form humus, some of the more stable trees get a foothold, and gradually, over about 1,000 years, we have something approaching a forest. In a mature forest, the growth is so slow, the shade being so deep, that there's a much more uniform flow in the streams that flow from such regions.
The vegetation on the top of the mountains could be compared to a little low jungle, only ankle high. The grasses, plants, and the bushes all come up together. Walking on them breaks not only the branches and knocks the leaves and the buds off, but it also breaks the roots of these plants. And they are attached in such shallow soil that they are in danger always of being lost.
The river is the lifeblood of the land. Beginning in mist and rain and snow, it gathers, and at last emerges as a river on its way to the sea. The young Adirondack River system has its origins near the center of the dome. 36 major rivers and tributaries radiate outwards like wheel spokes, dropping thousands of feet. There is no comparable river system in North America. The mountain waters gather in glacial lakes and behind beaver dams. And the lakes act as natural reservoirs for rivers downstream. A wealth of lakes sustain the rivers as they flow to the geologic edge of the Adirondacks. In the mountains, over 500,000 acres of wetlands are protected. These vital areas are the natural regulators of the rivers holding excess runoff. The plant growth acts as filters, purifying the water as it seeps through. New York's wild, scenic, and recreational river system protects nearly 1,400 miles of Adirondack rivers. By keeping these waters free-flowing, they can also fulfill their destiny as refuges for the spirit of man. Power. Few realize how much power Adirondack rivers generate. In the Adirondacks, more than 1,000 dams capable of producing power exist. Many of these are near the geologic edge of the Adirondacks, where natural elevation drops quickly and the greatest flow of water occurs. Related hydroelectric installations supply electricity for Upper New York State, and this will increase as more existing stations are reactivated or upgraded. Continued protection of the watershed mountains by Article 14 and of the rivers by the wild, scenic, and recreational river system will keep these powerful rivers, stabilizing their flow to help meet future energy needs of the state.
Well, in the early days, the loggers were considered as the villains because they clear-cut the area and left it in a devastated condition. But today, the lumber companies, because of the fact they have to keep their mills running, they want to keep the forest in a productive state. The lumber companies are actually now keeping much of the open land in forest growth, and therefore they actually enhance the Adirondack Park in general. They complement both the state and the private land as a result of their practice.
The unique quality and variety of Adirondack wildlife depend on great tracts of mature forests in the forest reserve, more open areas on private lands, and the unspoiled water system of the mountains. Here, wildlife can exist as an important and vital part of the natural ecosystem. Perhaps somewhere in the Adirondacks, areas should be set aside as wildlife sanctuaries. Throughout the United States, less than 1% of all land is wilderness. In the Forest Preserve, over 1 million acres exist in a state which is the second most populous in the whole country. 15 wilderness areas are the heartland of the Adirondacks. In 1937, Bob Marshall, spokesman for the American wilderness, warned, "The universe of the wilderness all over the United States is vanishing with appalling rapidity. It's melting away, like the last snowbank on some south-facing mountainside during a hot afternoon in June." He viewed wilderness as regions which contain no permanent inhabitants, possess no means of mechanical conveyance, and are sufficiently spacious that a person may spend at least a week or two of travel in them without crossing his own tracks. And he said, "For me, and for thousands with similar inclinations, the most important passion of life is the overpowering desire to escape periodically from the clutches of mechanistic civilization. To us, the enjoyment of solitude, complete independence, and the beauty of undefiled panoramas is absolutely essential to happiness." The wilderness set aside in the Forest Preserve is New York's answer to Marshall's voice, and it's a tribute to the people of the state who have gone to the polls each year and voted to maintain this unique area as part of their heritage. A place where not only the people of this generation, but the people of future generations can get a glimpse of the past and a view of the future.